When we read fiction, novels, and short stories, and especially poetry, we need to pay close attention to the words that the author uses. The words are what gets our attention. It is through the words that the authors tell us their story. So we're going to take a few class periods and we're going to look at the sounds of words and we're going to look at the meanings of words so that we can begin to understand that they're not just words on the page. They're words that have something to say. Listen to the video below. As you're listening to the video, watch the screen to see the words that are projected up there. Pay attention to words that sound like their meanings. For example, words like click and clack. Also look for other examples of repetition, alliteration, rhyme, or any other words or phrases that seem to catch your attention. It would be to your advantage to go back and watch the video 2 or 3 times. It's not very long. Okay, so here we have an example of just one of the verses in this song. Click, clack, open up the door, girls. Click, clack, open up the door, boys. Front door, back door, clickety, clack, I'll take you riding in my car. So this one slide just has all kinds of examples of the sounds of words in it. First of all, we have the examples of click and clack. These are examples of onomatopoeia because they sound like what they are, a click and a clack. They are also examples of something that we call consonants, the repetition of consonant sounds at the end of a word. We have alliteration, which is the repetition of consonant sounds at the beginning of the words, also in click and clack. So at the beginning, we have the cl, the CL sound, click, clack, click, clack. So those are examples of alliteration. At the end of the word, we have the k sound. So we also have examples of consonants. Click, clack. Again, the beginning is alliteration, the end is consonants. We also have here something called rhythm. Click, clack, open up the door, girls. Click, clack, open up the door, boys. Front door, back door, clickety, clack, I'll take you riding in my car. So rhythm is the little music that gets going with it when you see this. So look for this. You might want to go back and look at the video again and look for examples of this as you're doing that. As I mentioned, the video contains examples of alliteration. Alliteration is the repetition of consonant sounds that are found at the beginning of words. The example that I give you here is fast and furious. They have the repetition of the F sound at the beginning of each word. In our video, we have click and clack. The beginning cl sound with the CL, the repetition of that sound is alliteration. Another aspect of sounds of words is consonants. Consonants is repeated consonant sounds at the ending of words placed near each other, usually on the same or adjacent lines. The example I have here is boats into the past with the repetition of the st, the ST consonants. In our riding in my car video, we had click and clack, and the consonants examples would be the k sound at the end of each of those words. By now, I'm sure you all know what onomatopoeia is. It's words that sound like their meanings. Boom, buzz, crackle, gurgle, hiss, pop, sizzle, snap, swoosh, whir, zip. Those are all examples of onomatopoeia. In our song, we have vroom, 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 vroom. I can't do that very well, but that is an example of onomatopoeia. It's a vroom, and it sounds just like it's spelled. Repetition is the purposeful reuse of words and phrases for an effect. Sometimes, especially with longer phrases that contain a different keyword for each time, this is called parallelism. The example I have here is half a league, half a league, half a league onward. By repeating the phrase half a league, it makes more emphasis on what you're trying to say. Authors will do this many times to have repetition to emphasize what it is they are trying to say. Probably the device most commonly associated with poetry by most of us is rhyme. Words that have different beginning sounds but whose end sound alike, including the final vowel sound and everything follow it, are said to rhyme. We can look no further than children's nursery rhymes to find examples of this. Hickory dickory dock, the mouse ran up the clock. Dock and clock rhyme. Closely associated with rhyme when it comes to poetry is rhythm, the organization of speech rhythms, verbal stresses, into a regular pattern of accented syllables separated by unaccented syllables. The example I give here is I thought I saw a pussy cat. So when we say this, we're going to put it in that little musical rhythm pattern that we use. In our song, Take Me Riding in My Car, Car, Take Me Riding in the Car, Car, that has a rhythm to it too. This is closely associated with poetry, especially when we are younger and when we read it. I would like for you to click on this video and listen to Alan Rickman recite one of Shakespeare's sonnets. This is Sonnet 130, and when we first look at it, it's not a very flattering sonnet, but here he says a lot about his true love. Sonnets are 14-line poems, and most of the Shakespearean sonnets are dealing with the subject of love. This is another poem that I would like for you to listen to. This one is The Bells by Edgar Allan Poe. It is quite long, I realize that, but I want you to listen to the bells, and I want you to listen to the sound of the bells. I want you to listen to the sound of this narrator's voice, and I want you to pay attention to the words and listen to how the words describe the different types of bells that we come across in our daily lives. Now that we've looked at the sounds of words, let's look at the meanings of words. We're going to look at terms such as connotation, denotation, hyperbole, oxymoron, personification, metaphor, simile, and then we're going to look at imagery. These words or these terms talk about what our words actually mean when they're on the page. It's a little bit different than what you might think, or there's a purpose for doing some of these. So let's see what authors can do with their words. Let's move from the sounds of words to the meanings of words. Most of the time, authors are purposeful in the words that they choose to write. One example of the meaning of words is allusion. An allusion is a brief reference to some person, historical event, work of art, or biblical or mythological situation or character. A couple of examples are, Am I my brother's keeper? This is an allusion to the story of Cain and Abel that we find in the Bible. That was his Achilles' heel. This is an allusion to the story of Achilles. His mother dipped him into the river Styx and to make him invulnerable to weapons, but she held him by his heels. And so an Achilles' heel is somebody's weak spot. Another way to look at the meanings of words is to look at the literal meaning of a word or the figurative meaning of a word. Connotation is the figurative meaning of a word. It's the emotional, psychological, or social overtones of a word, its implications and associations apart from its literal meaning. So the example that I give you here is if I said you had a beautiful body, would you hold it against me? The literal meaning of would you hold it against me would be would you hold it up next to mine? However, in the connotative meaning of this, if I said you had a beautiful body, would you hold it against me? Holding something against somebody is to kind of keep a grudge because of something. So this is the connotative meaning. Would you hold it against me? Would you not like me for that for some reason? Opposite of connotation, we have denotation. Denotation is the dictionary definition of a word. It is the literal meaning of the word, apart from any associations or connotations. If I go back to my previous example, if I said you had a beautiful body, would you hold it against me? In the denotative meaning of this word, if I said you had a beautiful body, would you hold it against me? The author of these words are saying, would you hold your body against me? These two lines are actually taken from an old country and western song, and he's trying to come on to this girl, and he says, if I said you had a beautiful body, would you hold that body? Would you put your body up next to me? And so you can see the difference between the connotative meaning, which kind of has a negative um, effect to it, and the denotative meaning, which kind of has an intimate effect to it. Hyperbole is an extreme exaggeration used for effect. Your mother or your friends might say you use this in order to be dramatic. An example of this is my cat weighs a ton. No, my cat really doesn't weigh a ton, but she is pretty fat. Another example that we all use all the time is I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. I really don't know of any human being that could eat that much at one point, but there are times when we are very hungry.
We want to look at metaphor. A metaphor is a direct comparison between two unlike things, stating that one is the other or does the action of the other. You need to be careful and keep metaphor and simile apart. They are both comparison between two unlike things. Metaphor typically says that something is something else or something is doing the action of something else. A simile uses like or as to compare these two things. So the examples I give for a metaphor are he's a zero. That doesn't literally mean that he's a zero. He's not. He's a man, a person. But saying he's a zero means he really doesn't amount to much. The clock is a ticking time bomb. Here we're comparing a clock that's ticking to a time bomb that's going off. We know that when the time bomb gets to the end of its time, it's going to blow up. So it's comparing the clock on the wall to something that's fixing to blow up. Remember I talked about in the last slide that a metaphor is a comparison of two unlike things. I also said that a simile is a comparison of two unlike things, but a simile uses the words like or as to compare these things. For example, he's as big as an ox. They're comparing a person to that of an ox, the size of an ox. Her eyes are like comets. Again, we're using the word like to comparing her eyes to comets. Similes and metaphors are good ways that authors can use to explain something, describe something, and so they try to use terms that we could understand when describing it. An oxymoron is a combination of two words that appear to contradict each other. For example, we have the word bittersweet. It is actually one word, but two words that have been combined to make one word. You don't think of something as being bitter and sweet at the same time, but we often experience things that are bittersweet for us. Another example of oxymoron is icy hot. A very popular example that we tend to think of is jumbo shrimp. How can something be jumbo but also be a shrimp? I think one of my favorite poetic devices is that of personification. Personification is giving human qualities to an inanimate object, an animal, or an abstract idea. The wind danced in the trees. You and I have the ability to dance, but the wind does not. But we know what we're saying when somebody writes, "The wind danced in the trees." The summer days crept by slowly. We know again that days can't creep, but when the time is passing slowly, we would say that those days are creeping by. So we've talked about the sounds of words and the images of words. We use these words, or authors use these words, to create imagery, the use of vivid language to generate ideas and or evoke mental images, not only of the visual sense, but of sensation and emotion as well. For example, if we look at the sense of sight, smoke poured out of the chimney. We can see in our mind's eye when smoke pours out of a chimney. Compare that to smoke curling out of a chimney or smoke drifting out of the chimney. We get a different feeling or a different sight with the word poured used in that sentence. For sound, he could hear a faint but distinct thump, thump, thump. Can you hear it too? Touch. Dan's legs are as smooth as a baby's behind. I would bet most of us have felt a baby's behind and we know how smooth that is. We wouldn't expect some guy to have legs that are that smooth. Taste. A salty tear ran across her lips. We've all tasted the taste of our tears, and they do taste a little bit salty. Smell. Cinnamon. That's what wafted into his nostrils. I love the smell of cinnamon when it's baking in something. So we can look at the words that we use and the pictures that they evoke in our mind's eye. I always tell my students to think of the word walk. He walked down the hallway. What else could we say instead of walked to talk about somebody from getting from point A to point B? Well, kids will always say he walked down the hallway, he jumped, he ran, he skipped, he hopped. What about if he slithered down the hallway? What if he skedaddled down the hallway? What if he strutted down the hallway? All of these are different words that mean to get from one point to another, but they all evoke a different image in our mind's eye. Words are very powerful, and so when we read, we need to pay attention to those words. But we also need to pay attention to words, our word choice, when we write, because we want to give our readers an image in their mind's eye as well.